Now be a good boy, no escaping.
Serena's decision to end her engagement to Kenna in favor of a marriage her family sanctioned deserves to be read, from its very first mention, not as a simple romantic reversal, but as a case study in how family pressure operates most effectively, not through outright forbidding a relationship, but through the slower, more insidious work of casting doubt on its practicality, its viability, its worthiness of real investment, and the specific argument Serena's family made against Kenna, that she hadn't grown up yet, that writing was merely something she did for fun, that a starving artist's life offered no real security, reflects a particular and recognizable strategy for undermining a queer relationship without ever having to object to its queerness directly, because framing the objection around financial practicality and maturity allows a family to feel, and to present themselves as reasonable and loving rather than prejudiced, even when the underlying discomfort with their daughter loving a woman may be doing at least as much work in that judgment as any genuine concern about Kenna's career prospects. This kind of coded objection deserves careful unpacking, because many queer women will recognize exactly this pattern from their own lives, family members who claim not to have any issue with their child's sexuality, while nonetheless finding endless practical, financial, or logistical reasons why this particular partner isn't quite right, why the timing isn't quite right, why perhaps it would be wiser to wait, to reconsider, to keep options open. And the cumulative effect of this kind of soft, deniable pressure can be just as effective at derailing a relationship as more overt disapproval. Precisely because it's harder to name and resist, wrapped as it is in the language of loving concern, rather than open rejection. Serena's choice to yield to this pressure, to end things with Kenna and marry the man her family found more suitable, deserves to be read with real compassion rather than judgment. Because the pull toward choosing safety, financial security, family approval, a life that requires no explanation or defense, over a relationship that asks you to risk all of those things, reflects an entirely understandable human impulse, particularly for a woman whose family has significant wealth and influence riding on her choices. And Serena's decision doesn't reflect a failure of love for Kenna so much as a demonstration of how difficult it can be to choose authenticity when authenticity comes bundled with real material and social risk, a dynamic many women navigate regardless of sexual orientation. The calculation between what the heart wants and what feels survivable given the actual structures of family, money, and social standing a person has to live within. The year that follows, Serena's outward success working alongside her mother, her new engagement, presents on its surface exactly the life her family hoped for her: stable, prosperous, legible within their existing social world, and yet the persistent presence of Kenna, continuing to appear in Serena's life despite the ended engagement, deserves to be read carefully as more than simple plot contrivance, because Kenna's return isn't framed as pursuit that violates Serena's current relationship so much as an ongoing, honest refusal to simply disappear and pretend the connection between them never mattered, and there's a meaningful distinction between someone who manipulates or maneuvers their way back into a committed person's life through deception, and someone who, whether through genuine coincidence or deliberate but transparent choice, continues to show up honestly, allowing Serena the full agency to decide for herself, each time, whether to maintain distance or allow the connection to continue. And this distinction matters enormously for how we read Kenna's character throughout this story, because a Kenna who respects Serena's stated choices, while still being honest about her own unresolved feelings, occupies very different ethical territory than a Kenna who schemes or deceives to undermine Serena's current relationship without her full awareness and consent. The fiancé's discomfort with Kenna's continued presence deserves to be taken seriously as a reasonable position rather than dismissed as simple jealousy or insecurity, because any partner might reasonably feel unsettled by an ex-fiancé's persistent proximity. And this discomfort actually serves the story well by forcing Serena to confront a question she has likely been avoiding: whether her engagement represents an authentic choice she's prepared to fully commit to, or whether some part of her has been quietly relying on Kenna's continued presence precisely because full commitment to this more socially sanctioned path still doesn't feel entirely resolved within her. And the story's central question, whether Serena truly wants Kenna to leave, deserves to be read as fundamentally a question about Serena's own self-honesty, rather than about Kenna's behavior at all. because the actual drama here isn't whether Kenna will successfully win Serena back through some external campaign of persuasion. It's whether Serena will finally allow herself to examine honestly what she actually wants. Separate from what her family arranged, separate from what looks stable and impressive from the outside, separate even from whatever comfort or security her current engagement offers. This framing matters enormously for how the story should be read as a piece of queer representation. Because rather than depicting Kenna as an aggressive pursuer working to dismantle someone else's relationship, the more emotionally honest and more valuable version of this story centers Serena's own reckoning. Her gradual willingness to admit to herself that the practical, family-approved path she chose a year ago may have required her to suppress something genuinely important, rather than simply move past a youthful romance. And this kind of self-confrontation, the slow, often uncomfortable process of admitting that an earlier choice made for reasons of safety and approval doesn't actually satisfy something essential in yourself, resonates deeply with many women's experiences of choosing conventional, sanctioned paths over less certain but more authentic ones, and then living inside the quiet, persistent discomfort of knowing something essential was left unaddressed. Kenna's continued honesty and persistence, then, deserves to be read not as pressure exerted upon Serena, but as an act of faith in Serena's own capacity to eventually choose truthfully, a refusal to simply disappear and make things easier by removing herself from the equation. Because doing so would mean participating in exactly the kind of erasure this entire analysis has traced throughout this catalog, the pattern in which queer relationships are expected to quietly step aside in favor of more socially convenient, more easily explained heterosexual arrangements, and Kenna's choice to remain honestly present, whatever the emotional cost to herself, insists instead that her love for Serena deserves the same weight and consideration as any other relationship, not something to be politely dissolved simply because a more socially legible alternative has presented itself. What ultimately makes Relentless Love worth taking seriously, provided its execution honors Serena's full agency throughout, is its willingness to ask a question many people, and particularly many women who have felt pressure to choose stability and family approval over authentic desire, recognize as genuinely difficult and genuinely unresolved in their own lives, whether the safer, more sanctioned choice actually constitutes happiness, or whether it simply constitutes the appearance of happiness maintained through the ongoing quiet suppression of a truer want. And Serena's eventual decision, whichever way the story ultimately resolves it, matters most not for its plot outcome, but for whether she arrives at that decision through genuine self-honesty rather than either family pressure or romantic persuasion. Because a Serena who finally chooses Kenna because she has done the difficult work of admitting what she actually wants offers considerably more value to audiences than a Serena who is simply won over through persistence. And the story is strongest when it trusts its central question. Not can Kenna win Serena back, but will Serena finally allow herself to know